Before you can attract the right people into your life, whether in business, relationships, or leadership, you must first become someone worth finding. The world isn't waiting for your perfection. It's waiting for your clarity, your conviction, and your courage. Right now, as you sit here, people are already deciding whether to follow you, trust you, or invest in you based on the energy you broadcast. The question is, are you sending the signal of who you truly are, or the static of who you're trying to be? If you don't intentionally shape the message you give the world will decide for you. And that's how the wrong people show up. So today isn't just about attracting the right people. It's about becoming the person who pulls them in without chasing, convincing, or begging. Because when you stand in who you are, the right people won't just follow. They will find you. The identity you project determines the people you invite into your life, and most men underestimate how much this shapes every relationship they form. When a man hasn't defined who he is, he leaves the door open for anyone to walk in. Friends, partners, co-workers, many of whom reflect his uncertainty rather than his potential. Men often think they attract based on what they do, but they attract based on who they believe they are. When that belief is vague, so is the quality of the people they pull toward them. Women respond to a man whose identity is anchored, not scattered. A woman doesn't look for perfection. She looks for consistency, someone whose words, actions, and values line up even when no one is watching. She feels safe with a man who knows himself, because his clarity creates emotional stability. But when a man's identity shifts depending on who he's trying to impress, she instinctively withdraws. Uncertainty in identity feels like uncertainty in the relationship. Men, on the other hand, gravitate toward those who respect the identity they've chosen. When a man stands firmly in who he is, he naturally repels people who drain him and attracts people who align with his mission. Identity becomes a filter, removing noise and amplifying what truly matters. Clarity is a magnet, because people instinctively move toward what feels certain. And most men underestimate how deeply this affects every connection they try to build. When a man lacks clarity about his values, his goals, or the kind of relationships he wants, he unintentionally creates a fog around himself. In that fog, the wrong people wander in, not because they belong there, but because there's nothing guiding them. Men often confuse being flexible with being vague, but vague men attract chaotic situations, unpredictable partners, and friendships that drain more than they contribute. Women naturally seek clarity in a man because clarity feels like direction, and direction feels like security. A woman doesn't need a man who has everything figured out, but she does need one who knows what he stands for. When a man communicates with purpose, she feels the strength behind his intentions. But when he moves through life with uncertainty, unsure of what he wants, who he is, or where he's going, she senses instability long before he realizes he's projecting it. Men, too, are drawn to clarity because it simplifies the world around them. When a man becomes clear about his identity and expectations, he starts attracting people who match his pace and mindset. Clarity narrows the field, filters distractions, and frees him from constantly explaining or defending himself. Your values speak long before you ever open your mouth because people read who you are through what you consistently choose. Most men overlook this simple truth. You don't attract people based on what you say you believe, but on what your daily decisions reveal. Every boundary you hold, every standard you enforce, and every compromise you refuse becomes a silent broadcast of your character. When a man's values are inconsistent, others sense the contradiction instantly, and the wrong people slip through the cracks created by his lack of alignment. Women pay close attention to a man's values, not because they expect him to be flawless, but because values show reliability. A woman watches how a man treats people who can't offer him anything, how he responds under pressure, and how he behaves when temptation meets opportunity. She trusts a man whose actions align with the principles he claims to live by. And she distances herself from the man who only performs integrity when someone is watching. To her, values are emotional truth. They reveal whether he is stable or unpredictable. Men also read each other's values, even when they don't articulate it. A man naturally respects another man who stands firm in his principles, because values define strength in a way muscles never could. When a man lives by his values without bending for approval, he attracts friends, partners, and allies who share the same code. If you don't set standards, you open your life to people who were never meant to be there. And most men don't realize how quickly this happens. A man without standards becomes a man without direction, allowing anyone's expectations to override his own. When a man fails to decide what he will tolerate, what he will prioritize, and what he will pursue, he unintentionally hands control of his life to whoever is loudest, neediest, or most persistent. Standards are not walls, they are filters. Without them, a man becomes vulnerable to relationships that drain him, opportunities that distract him, and influences that weaken him. Women are incredibly responsive to a man's standards because standards communicate self-respect. A woman doesn't want a man she can walk over. She wants a man she can rely on. When a man enforces his boundaries with consistency, she interprets that as emotional strength and leadership. But when he lowers his standards to gain approval or avoid conflict, she loses trust. Not because he's unstable. A man who doesn't protect his own standards cannot protect a relationship. Men also evaluate each other through standards, often without speaking a word. A man who upholds his boundaries earns respect because he shows discipline and direction. He attracts other men who value loyalty, purpose, and accountability, and he naturally repels those who thrive on chaos or convenience. Authenticity isn't a brand because real connection has nothing to do with crafting an image and everything to do with revealing who you truly are. Most men get trapped trying to present a version of themselves they think others will approve of. Stronger, smoother, more impressive. But in trying to be everything, they lose the one thing people actually trust: sincerity. A man who performs an identity instead of living one ends up surrounded by people who connect with the performance, not the person. Authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent in who you are, even when that honesty feels risky. Women recognize authenticity not through a man's words, but through the alignment between his personality and his presence. A woman is drawn to a man who is grounded in his truth because it signals emotional safety and transparency. She doesn't want a man who hides behind confidence he doesn't own or pretends to be unaffected by the world. She wants a man who is real enough to admit his strengths and his struggles without losing his sense of self. When a man's authenticity shines, she feels clarity. Clarity about his intentions, his character, and his emotional reliability. Men are equally drawn to authenticity because it creates mutual respect. A man who shows up as himself gives other men permission to do the same. Authenticity becomes a beacon that attracts people who appreciate honesty, loyalty, and depth, rather than competition and pretense. It separates allies from opportunists, real friendships from transactional ones, and meaningful connections from temporary alignments. The right people show up when you stop chasing the wrong ones, because your energy becomes available for what actually aligns with you. Most men exhaust themselves pursuing relationships, friendships, or opportunities that were never compatible with their identity in the first place. They chase validation, attention, or acceptance, believing that effort alone will create connection. But chasing is a signal that you're trying to force something instead of attracting it. When a man stops running after people who don't match his values, he creates the space for the right people to finally see him. Women respond powerfully to a man who no longer chases because it shows emotional maturity. A woman feels the difference between a man who pursues with sincerity and a man who chases from insecurity. When a man stops trying to win over people who don't appreciate him, his confidence becomes grounded rather than performative. She feels drawn to a man who knows he is worthy of reciprocation, partnership, and respect. Women don't want a man who begs for attention. They want a man who invites presence through who he is, not what he proves. Men also thrive when they stop chasing because it strengthens their sense of identity. A man who no longer seeks approval from the wrong crowd begins to recognize his own value more clearly. He stops bending his standards, shrinking his voice, or changing his personality just to fit into spaces he doesn't belong. Instead, he stands in his purpose, and in doing so, he attracts other men who share similar principles and ambitions. These are the men who become brothers, mentors, partners in growth, not competitors or distractions. When a man stops chasing, he stops signaling desperation and starts signaling direction. And people who walk the same path naturally fall in step beside him.